Hi. In this video I like to talk about the Behringer dual filter module 121, which is part of the System 100 series. This module features two completely independent voltage controlled filters and shares this dual topology with the VCO, the VCA and the envelope. To put it simple, a low pass filter lets low frequencies pass through and filters out the higher ones. When we take a basic sound like a sawtooth wave from an oscillator, this sound has a fundamental frequency, which is also called the pitch. Here it is at about 100 Hz. And then we see a whole set of higher harmonics in the frequency spectrum. Sawtooth waves have the highest amount of higher harmonics compared to the other basic waveforms, so they are perfectly suited for filtering. When we now close the filter, which means we reduce its cutoff frequency, it starts to filter the higher harmonics out. The sound loses its brightness and we achieved the basic sound shaping of subtractive synthesis, since we remove or subtract a certain amount of the harmonics of our initial sound. We have to look at the filter curve. The filter curve plots the amount of attenuation of the frequencies over the frequency range. For the 121 low pass filter, it roughly looks like this, and it starts with a plateau on the left where all frequencies can pass through unattenuated. Then we reach the so-called cutoff frequency, which is followed by a slope where the higher frequencies are attenuated gradually. The slope here has a steepness of 24 dB per octave, which means that a sound which is 1 octave higher than another one would be 24 dB quieter in the filter output compared to the lower sound. I created a simple test sound with my Korg Volca FM here, which consists of 6 sine waves. And since sine waves have no harmonics but only a fundamental frequency, we can now see 6 peaks in the frequency spectrum. The 6 sine waves are all 1 octave apart and the frequency doubles with every octave, so it grows exponentially and consequently the distance between these peaks also doubles. When we close the filter now, the higher peaks become attenuated and we can roughly measure a slope of 24 dB per octave. Most filters feature a resonance or feedback, which means that an adjustable amount of the filter output is fed back to its input internally. This lifts a portion of the filter curve around the cutoff frequency and boosts the frequencies here. With higher resonance settings, most filters start to self-oscillate, which means they output their own sound even without any input. The output waveform is typically a sine wave, and when the filter allows an exponential tracking, then we can use it as a sine wave voltage-controlled oscillator. In contrast to the just discussed low-pass filters, high-pass filters do the opposite and filter lower frequencies out, and the filter curve is consequently flipped horizontally. High-pass filters are often found in a non-voltage controlled design, since their purpose is often to just cut away the probably too dominant low end of the sound. The ARP Odyssey, for example, has a manually adjustable high-pass filter, and in the 121 module, the high pass is also not voltage controllable. This is easier to design and the circuits are much simpler than the voltage controllable ones, so especially in the early days of synthesizers, when all these electronic components were very expensive, this was a benefit, and for high pass filters it was acceptable when they are not voltage controllable. On the other hand, the MS-20 has a voltage controllable high pass, while the Minimoog Model D doesn't have a high pass at all. Well, in fact, the Behringer one does have a high pass, since we can switch this filter between low and high pass. Filters are probably the most important sound shaping components, and often they are responsible for the unique character of a synth. The MS-20, for example, has a 6 dB high pass in series with a 12 dB low pass. both in the so-called cell and key design, and both with lots of saturation, which leads to the famous screaming sound. The ARP Odyssey had different filters over its revisions. The first one was a 12 decibel per octave. And the later ones were 24 decibel per octave, with a bit cleaner resonance behavior. And then there is the famous, the ultimate, the one and only, the benchmark 24 decibel per octave ladder filter from Moog, which was included, for example, in the Minimoog Model D. And, well, it depends on your personal taste if you celebrate this filter or not. It's certainly not the only legit filter design out there. Okay, let's switch to the 121 module and talk about the left filter, and the right one is completely identical. We have a 24 decibel per octave OTA-based voltage controlled low pass filter here, which is combined with a switchable high pass filter in series. Let's leave the high pass out for a moment and just keep it turned off. Here we have the three audio inputs, which all have their own attenuator, so this is actually a little audio mixer as part of this filter, which is a great feature. This green LED here indicates that an audio signal is present, and it switches to this red LED when the audio inputs overload the filter. This leads to some nice distortion effects that we will try out in a few moments. These are the sliders for the cutoff frequency and the resonance, both with these red LEDs that give the System 100 from Behringer such a nice appearance. Here we have the two filter outputs, both are internally connected and output the same signals. Further down we have the CV inputs for the cutoff frequency, again 3 inputs with attenuator, so this is the CV mixer in addition to the audio mixer here. When we turn the CV attenuators to the fully clockwise position, the filter tracks 1 volt per octave, so with full resonance we can use it as a sine wave VCO. Or even better, since this is a dual module, we have 2 sine wave VCOs and they can produce some very interesting sounds. Finally, we have this switch here, which selects different discrete frequency settings for the high-pass filter. This high-pass has a slope of 6 dB per octave, and in the lowest position it is just turned off. And then we can switch it to 1 kHz, 2 kHz and 5 kHz. The high-pass filter is located upstream of the low-pass, so the audio signal passes through the high-pass first and then through the voltage-controlled low-pass. This also means that the low-pass filter resonance is not affected by the high-pass filter. Some reviews, by the way, tell this wrong and place the high-pass downstream of the low-pass, but that's not the case, and we can also see this in the original circuit diagrams. Here we have this switch, which just selects different capacitors, so it's a passive high-pass filter, and the signal then enters the OTA stages of the 4-pole low-pass. I find these discrete high-pass settings a bit coarse and all a bit high, so not really helpful, since 1 kHz is the lowest setting above off, and this is already more than just cutting away the low growling swamp of the sound. So let's listen to some filter sweeps with a simple saw wave input. Now let's use a more complex input and I just connected two different VCOs to the audio inputs of the filter. When we turn up the audio attenuators too much, then the filter gets into its overload state, which means it starts to saturate. This is not harmful for the filter circuits, but the sound becomes a bit more distorted. And this creates an amazingly characterful sound. The build quality of this module is okay, and all the knobs, which are actually trimmer pots, feel very sturdy and heavy, and also the sliders for the cutoff frequency and the resonance are okay. There is a bit of wobble here, but I guess that's normal, and I know this from most other modules that use these sliders. It's great that Behringer captured the audio mixers and the CV mixers, which makes patching very fluent, and also the sound tweaking is very nice, because you have all the attenuators there where you need them. But the most important thing about this filter is that it just gives us an amazing sound. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.